Today, in Audiobooks for Me, we are going to listen to Arsène Lupin versus Herlock Sholmès by Maurice Leblanc. This book is divided in 3 videos. This is Part 2. We hope you enjoy it. Chapter 3. Herlock Sholmes opens hostilities. What does Monsieur wish? Anything, replied Arsène Lupin, like a man who never worries over the details of a meal. Anything you like, but no meat or alcohol. The waiter walked away disdainfully. What? Still a vegetarian? I exclaimed. More so than ever, replied Lupin, through taste, faith, or habit. Hygiene. And do you never fall from grace? Oh, yes, when I'm dining out, and wish to avoid being considered eccentric. We were dining near the Northern Railway Station, in a little restaurant to which Arsène Lupin had invited me. Frequently, he would send me a telegram, asking me to meet him in some obscure restaurant, where we could enjoy a quiet dinner, well served, and which was always made interesting to me by his recital of some startling adventure theretofore unknown to me. On that particular evening, he appeared to be in a more lively mood than usual. He laughed and joked with careless animation, and with that delicate sarcasm that was habitual with him, a light and spontaneous sarcasm that was quite free from any tinge of malice. It was a pleasure to find him in that jovial mood, and I could not resist the desire to tell him so. "Ah, yes," he exclaimed. "There are days in which I find life as bright and gay as a spring morning. Then life seems to be an infinite treasure which I can never exhaust, and yet, God knows, I lead a careless existence. Too much so, perhaps. Ah, but I tell you, the treasure is infinite. I can spend it with a lavish hand. I can cast my youth and strength to the 4 winds of heaven, and it is replaced by a still younger and greater force. Besides, my life is so pleasant. If I wished to do so, I might become, what shall I say, an orator, a manufacturer, a politician, but I assure you I shall never have such a desire. Arsène Lupin I am. Arsène Lupin I shall remain. I have made a vain search in history to find a career comparable to mine, a life better filled or more intense. Napoleon? Yes, perhaps. But Napoleon, toward the close of his career, when all Europe was trying to crush him, asked himself on the eve of each battle if it would not be his last. Was he serious? Or was he joking? He became more animated as he proceeded. That is everything. Do you understand? The danger, the continuous feeling of danger. To breathe it as you breathe the air, to scent it in every breath of wind, to detect it in every unusual sound, and in the midst of the tempest to remain calm and not to stumble. Otherwise, you are lost. There is only one sensation equal to it, that of the chauffeur in an automobile race. But that race lasts only a few hours. My race continues until death. What fantasy, I exclaimed, and you wish me to believe that you have no particular motive for your adoption of that exciting life. Come, he said with a smile. You are a clever psychologist. Work it out for yourself. He poured himself a glass of water, drank it, and said, Did you read Le Temps today? No. Herlock Sholmes crossed the Channel this afternoon and arrived in Paris about 6 o'clock. The deuce! What is he coming for? A little journey he has undertaken at the request of the Count and Countess of Crozon, Monsieur Gerbois, and the nephew of Baron d'Autrec. They met him at the Northern Railway Station, took him to meet Ganimard, and at this moment, the 6 of them are holding a consultation. Despite a strong temptation to do so, I had never ventured to question Arsène Lupin concerning any action of his private life, unless he had first mentioned the subject to me. Up to that moment, His name had not been mentioned, at least officially, in connection with the blue diamond. Consequently, I consumed my curiosity in patience. He continued, "There is also in Le Temps an interview with my old friend Ganimard, according to whom a certain blonde lady, who should be my friend, must have murdered the Baron d'Autrec and tried to rob Madame de Crozon of her famous ring. And, what do you think? He accuses me of being the instigator of those crimes." I could not suppress a slight shudder. Was this true? Must I believe that his career of theft, his mode of existence, the logical result of such a life, had drawn that man into more serious crimes, including murder? I looked at him. He was so calm, and his eyes had such a frank expression. I observed his hands. They had been formed from a model of exceeding delicacy, long and slender, inoffensive, truly, and the hands of an artist. "Ganimard has pipe dreams," I said. "No, no," protested Lupin. "Ganimard has some cleverness, and at times, almost inspiration." Inspiration? Yes. For instance, that interview is a master stroke. In the first place, he announces the coming of his English rival in order to put me on my guard and make his task more difficult. In the second place, he indicates the exact point to which he has conducted the affair in order that Sholmes will not get credit for the work already done by Ganimard. That is good warfare. Whatever it may be, you have two adversaries to deal with, and such adversaries. Oh, one of them doesn't count. And the other? Sholmes? Oh, I confess he is a worthy foe, and that explains my present good humor. In the first place, it is a question of self-esteem. I am pleased to know that they consider me a subject worthy the attention of the celebrated English detective. In the next place, just imagine the pleasure a man, such as I, must experience in the thought of a duel with Herlock Sholmes, but I shall be obliged to strain every muscle. He is a clever fellow and will contest every inch of the ground. Then you consider him a strong opponent. I do. As a detective, I believe, he has never had an equal. But I have one advantage over him. He is making the attack, and I am simply defending myself. My role is the easier one. Besides, I am familiar with his method of warfare, and he does not know mine. I am prepared to show him a few new tricks that will give him something to think about. He tapped the table with his fingers as he uttered the following sentences, with an air of keen delight. Arsène Lupin against Herlock Sholmes. France against England. Trafalgar will be revenged at last. Ah, the rascal. He doesn't suspect that I am prepared. And a Lupin warned. He stopped suddenly, seized with a fit of coughing, and hid his face in his napkin, as if something had stuck in his throat. "A bit of bread?" I inquired. "Drink some water." "No, it isn't that," he replied in a stifled voice. "Then what is it?" "The want of air." "Do you wish a window opened?" "No, I shall go out. Give me my hat and overcoat, quick. I must go." "What's the matter?" "The two gentlemen who came in just now. Look at the taller one. Now, when we go out, keep to my left so he will not see me." "The one who is sitting behind you?" "Yes, I will explain it to you outside." "Who is it?" "Herlock Sholmes." He made a desperate effort to control himself, as if he were ashamed of his emotion, replaced his napkin, drank a glass of water, and quite recovered, said to me, smiling, "It is strange, Hayne, that I should be affected so easily, but that unexpected sight. What have you to fear, since no one can recognize you on account of your many transformations? Every time I see you, it seems to me, your face is changed. It's not at all familiar. I don't know why. But he would recognize me, said Lupin. "He has seen me only once, but at that time he made a mental photograph of me, not of my external appearance, but of my very soul, not what I appear to be, but just what I am. Do you understand? And then, I did not expect to meet him here. Such a strange encounter, in this little restaurant. Well, shall we go out?" "No, not now," said Lupin. "What are you going to do?" "The better way is to act frankly, to have confidence in him. Trust him." "You will not speak to him?" "Why not? It will be to my advantage to do so, and find out what he knows, and perhaps what he thinks. At present I have the feeling that his gaze is on my neck and shoulders, and that he is trying to remember where he has seen them before." He reflected a moment. I observed a malicious smile at the corner of his mouth. Then, obedient, I think, to a whim of his impulsive nature, and not to the necessities of the situation, he arose, turned around, and with a bow and a joyous air, he said, "By what lucky chance? Ah, I am delighted to see you. Permit me to introduce a friend of mine." For a moment, the Englishman was disconcerted. Then he made a movement as if he would seize Arsène Lupin. The latter shook his head and said, "That would not be fair. Besides, the movement would be an awkward one and quite useless." The Englishman looked about him, as if in search of assistance. "No use," said Lupin. "Besides, are you quite sure you can place your hand on me? Come now, show me that you are a real Englishman and therefore a good sport." This advice seemed to commend itself to the detective, for he partially rose and said, very formally, "Monsieur Wilson, my friend and assistant, Monsieur Arsène Lupin." Wilson's amazement evoked a laugh. With bulging eyes and gaping mouth, he looked from one to the other, as if unable to comprehend the situation. Herlock Sholmes laughed and said, "Wilson, you should conceal your astonishment at an incident which is one of the most natural in the world." "Why do you not arrest him?" stammered Wilson. "Have you not observed, Wilson, that the gentleman is between me and the door, and only a few steps from the door? By the time I could move my little finger, he would be outside." "Don't let that make any difference," said Lupin, who now walked around the table and seated himself so that the Englishman was between him and the door, thus placing himself at the mercy of the foreigner. Wilson looked at Sholmes to find out if he had the right to admire this act of wanton courage. The Englishman's face was impenetrable, but a moment later he called, "Waiter!" When the waiter came, he ordered soda, beer, and whiskey. The treaty of peace was signed, until further orders. In a few moments, the four men were conversing in an apparently friendly manner. Herlock Sholmes is a man such as you might meet every day in the business world. He is about 50 years of age and looks as if he might have passed his life in an office, adding up columns of dull figures or writing out formal statements of business accounts. There was nothing to distinguish him from the average citizen of London, except the appearance of his eyes, his terribly keen and penetrating eyes. But then, he is Herlock Sholmes, which means that he is a wonderful combination of intuition, observation, clairvoyance, and ingenuity. One could readily believe that nature had been pleased to take the two most extraordinary detectives that the imagination of man has hitherto conceived, the Dupin of Edgar Allan Poe and the Lecoq of Émile Gaboriau, and out of that material constructed a new detective, more extraordinary and supernatural than either of them. And when a person reads the history of his exploits, which have made him famous throughout the entire world, he asks himself whether Herlock Sholmes is not a mythical personage, a fictitious hero, born in the brain of a great novelist. Conan Doyle, for instance. When Arsène Lupin questioned him in regard to the length of his sojourn in France, he turned the conversation into its proper channel by saying, "That depends on you, monsieur." "Oh," exclaimed Lupin, laughing. "If it depends on me, you can return to England tonight." "That is a little too soon, but I expect to return in the course of 8 or 9 days, 10 at the outside. Are you in such a hurry?" "I have many cases to attend to, such as the robbery of the Anglo-Chinese bank, the abduction of Lady Eccleston. But don't you think, Monsieur Lupin, that I can finish my business in Paris within a week?" "Certainly, if you confine your efforts to the case of the Blue Diamond. It is, moreover, the length of time that I require to make preparations for my safety in case the solution of that affair should give you certain dangerous advantages over me." "And yet," said the Englishman, "I expect to close the business in 8 or 10 days." "And arrest me on the 11th, perhaps?" "No, the 10th is my limit." Lupin shook his head thoughtfully as he said, "That will be difficult, very difficult." "Difficult, perhaps, but possible, therefore certain." "Absolutely certain," said Wilson, as if he had clearly worked out the long series of operations which would conduct his collaborator to the desired result. "Of course," said Herlock Sholmes, "I do not hold all the trump cards, as these cases are already several months old, and I lack certain information and clues upon which I am accustomed to base my investigations." "Such as spots of mud and cigarette ashes," said Wilson, with an air of importance. "In addition to the remarkable conclusions formed by Monsieur Ganimard, I have obtained all the articles written on the subject and have formed a few deductions of my own. Some ideas which were suggested to us by analysis or hypothesis," added Wilson sententiously. "I wish to inquire," said Arsène Lupin, in that deferential tone which he employed in speaking to Sholmes, "would I be indiscreet if I were to ask you what opinion you have formed about the case?" Really, it was a most exciting situation to see those two men, facing each other across the table, engaged in an earnest discussion as if they were obliged to solve some abstruse problem or come to an agreement upon some controverted fact. Wilson was in the 7th heaven of delight. Herlock Sholmes filled his pipe slowly, lighted it, and said, "This affair is much simpler than it appeared to be at first sight." "Much simpler," said Wilson as a faithful echo. "I say this affair, for in my opinion there is only one," said Sholmes. "The death of the Baron d'Autrec, the story of the ring, and let us not forget the mystery of lottery ticket number 514 are only different phases of what one might call the mystery of the blonde lady. Now, according to my view, it is simply a question of discovering the bond that unites those 3 episodes in the same story, the fact which proves the unity of the 3 events. Ganimard, whose judgment is rather superficial, finds that unity in the faculty of disappearance, that is, in the power of coming and going unseen and unheard. That theory does not satisfy me." "Well, what is your idea?" asked Lupin. "In my opinion," said Sholmes, "the characteristic feature of the 3 episodes is your design and purpose of leading the affair into a certain channel previously chosen by you. It is, on your part, more than a plan, it is a necessity, an indispensable condition of success. Can you furnish any details of your theory?" "Certainly. For example, from the beginning of your conflict with Monsieur Gerbois, is it not evident that the apartment of Monsieur Detinan is the place selected by you, the inevitable spot where all the parties must meet? In your opinion, it was the only safe place, and you arranged a rendezvous there, publicly one might say, for the blonde lady and Mademoiselle Gerbois. The professor's daughter, added Wilson. Now let us consider the case of the blue diamond. Did you try to appropriate it while the Baron d'Autrec possessed it? No, but the Baron takes his brother's house. 6 months later, we have the intervention of Antoinette Bréat, and the first attempt. The diamond escapes you, and the sale is widely advertised to take place at the Dreux auction rooms. Will it be a free and open sale? Is the richest amateur sure to carry off the jewel? No. Just as the banker Hirschman is on the point of buying the ring, a lady sends him a letter of warning, and it is the Countess de Crozon, prepared and influenced by the same lady, who becomes the purchaser of the diamond. Will the ring disappear at once? No. You lack the opportunity. Therefore, you must wait. At last the Countess goes to her chateau. That is what you were waiting for. The ring disappears. To reappear again in the tooth powder of Herr Blechen, remarked Lupin. Oh, such nonsense, exclaimed Sholmes, striking the table with his fist. Don't tell me such a fairy tale. I am too old a fox to be led away by a false scent. What do you mean? What do I mean? Said Sholmes, then paused a moment as if he wished to arrange his effect. At last he said, The blue diamond that was found in the tooth powder was false. You kept the genuine stone. Arsène Lupin remained silent for a moment. Then, with his eyes fixed on the Englishman, he replied calmly, You are impertinent, monsieur. Impertinent indeed, repeated Wilson, beaming with admiration. Yes, said Lupin, and yet, to do you credit, you have thrown a strong light on a very mysterious subject. Not a magistrate, not a special reporter, who has been engaged on this case, has come so near the truth. It is a marvelous display of intuition and logic. Oh, a person has simply to use his brains, said Herlock Sholmes, nattered at the homage of the expert criminal. And so few have any brains to use, replied Lupin. And now that the field of conjectures has been narrowed down and the rubbish cleared away, well, now I have simply to discover why the 3 episodes were enacted at 25 Rue Clapeyron, 134 Avenue Henri Martin, and within the walls of the Château de Crozon, and my work will be finished. What remains will be child's play. Don't you think so? Yes, I think you are right. In that case, Monsieur Lupin, am I wrong in saying that my business will be finished in 10 days? In 10 days you will know the whole truth, said Lupin, and you will be arrested. No, no. In order that I may be arrested, there must occur such a series of improbable and unexpected misfortunes that I cannot admit the possibility of such an event. We have a saying in England that the unexpected always happens. They looked at each other for a moment calmly and fearlessly, without any display of bravado or malice. They met as equals in a contest of wit and skill, and this meeting was the formal crossing of swords, preliminary to the duel. Ah, exclaimed Lupin, at last I shall have an adversary worthy of the name, one whose defeat will be the proudest achievement in my career. Are you not afraid? Asked Wilson. Almost, Monsieur Wilson, replied Lupin, rising from his chair, and the proof is that I am about to make a hasty retreat. Then we will say 10 days, Monsieur Sholmes. Yes, 10 days. This is Sunday. A week from next Wednesday, at 8 o'clock in the evening, it will be all over. And I shall be in prison? No doubt of it. Ha! Not a pleasant outlook for a man who gets so much enjoyment out of life as I do. No cares, a lively interest in the affairs of the world, a justifiable contempt for the police, and the consoling sympathy of numerous friends and admirers. And now behold, all that is about to be changed. It is the reverse side of the medal. After sunshine comes the rain. It is no longer a laughing matter. Adieu." "Hurry up," said Wilson, full of solicitude for a person in whom Herlock Sholmes had inspired so much respect. "Do not lose a minute." "Not a minute, Monsieur Wilson, but I wish to express my pleasure at having met you, and to tell you how much I envy the master in having such a valuable assistant as you seem to be." Then, after they had courteously saluted each other, like adversaries in a duel who entertain no feeling of malice, but are obliged to fight by force of circumstances, Lupin seized me by the arm and drew me outside. "What do you think of it, dear boy? The strange events of this evening will form an interesting chapter in the memoirs you are now preparing for me." He closed the door of the restaurant behind us, and after taking a few steps, he stopped and said, "Do you smoke?" "No, nor do you, it seems to me." "You are right, I don't." He lighted a cigarette with a wax match, which he shook several times in an effort to extinguish it. But he threw away the cigarette immediately, ran across the street, and joined two men who emerged from the shadows as if called by a signal. He conversed with them for a few minutes on the opposite sidewalk, and then returned to me. "I beg your pardon, but I fear that cursed Sholmes is going to give me trouble. But I assure you he is not yet through with Arsène Lupin. He will find out what kind of fuel I use to warm my blood. And now, au revoir. The genial Wilson is right. There is not a moment to lose." He walked away rapidly. Thus ended the events of that exciting evening, or at least that part of them in which I was a participant. Subsequently, during the course of the evening, other stirring incidents occurred, which have come to my knowledge through the courtesy of other members of that unique dinner party. At the very moment in which Lupin left me, Herlock Sholmes rose from the table and looked at his watch. 20 minutes to 9. At 9 o'clock, I am to meet the Count and Countess at the railway station. "Then we must be off," exclaimed Wilson between two drinks of whiskey. They left the restaurant. "Wilson, don't look behind. We may be followed, and in that case, let us act as if we did not care. Wilson, I want your opinion. Why was Lupin in that restaurant?" "To get something to eat," replied Wilson quickly. "Wilson, I must congratulate you on the accuracy of your deduction. I couldn't have done better myself." Wilson blushed with pleasure, and Sholmes continued, "To get something to eat. Very well. And after that, probably, to assure himself whether I am going to the Château de Crozon, as announced by Ganimard in his interview. I must go in order not to disappoint him. But in order to gain time on him, I shall not go." "Ah," said Wilson, nonplussed. "You, my friend, will walk down this street, take a carriage, 2, 3 carriages, return later and get the valises that we left at the station and make for the Élysée Palace at a gallop. And when I reach the Élysée Palace, engage a room, go to sleep, and await my orders." Quite proud of the important role assigned to him, Wilson set out to perform his task. Herlock Sholmes proceeded to the railway station, bought a ticket, and repaired to the Amiens Express, in which the Count and Countess de Crozon were already installed. He bowed to them, lighted his pipe, and had a quiet smoke in the corridor. The train started. 10 minutes later, he took a seat beside the Countess and said to her, "Have you the ring here, madame?" "Yes." "Will you kindly let me see it?" He took it and examined it closely. "Just as I suspected. It is a manufactured diamond." "A manufactured diamond?" "Yes. A new process which consists in submitting diamond dust to a tremendous heat until it melts and is then molded into a single stone." "But my diamond is genuine." "Yes, your diamond is, but this is not yours. Where is mine? It is held by Arsène Lupin. And this stone was substituted for yours and slipped into Herr Bleichen's tooth powder, where it was afterwards found. Then you think this is false? Absolutely false. The Countess was overwhelmed with surprise and grief, while her husband scrutinized the diamond with an incredulous air. Finally, she stammered, "Is it possible? And why did they not merely steal it and be done with it? And how did they steal it?" "That is exactly what I am going to find out." "At the Château de Crozon?" "No, I shall leave the train at Creil and return to Paris. It is there the game between me and Arsène Lupin must be played. In fact, the game has commenced already, and Lupin thinks I am on my way to the chateau. But what does it matter to you, madame? The essential thing is your diamond, is it not?" "Yes." "Well, don't worry. I have just undertaken a much more difficult task than that. You have my promise that I will restore the true diamond to you within 10 days. The train slackened its speed. He put the false diamond in his pocket and opened the door. The Count cried out, "That is the wrong side of the train. You are getting out on the tracks." "That is my intention. If Lupin has anyone on my track, he will lose sight of me now. Adieu." An employee protested in vain. After the departure of the train, the Englishman sought the station master's office. 40 minutes later, he leapt into a train that landed him in Paris shortly before midnight. He ran across the platform, entered the lunchroom, made his exit at another door, and jumped into a cab. Driver, Rue Clapiron. Having reached the conclusion that he was not followed, he stopped the carriage at the end of the street and proceeded to make a careful examination of Monsieur Detinan's house and the 2 adjoining houses. He made measurements of certain distances and entered the figures in his notebook. Driver, Avenue Henri Martin. At the corner of the avenue and the Rue de la Pompe, he dismissed the carriage, walked down the street to number 134, and performed the same operations in front of the house of the late Baron d'Autrec and the 2 adjoining houses, measuring the width of the respective facades and calculating the depth of the little gardens that stood in front of them. The avenue was deserted and was very dark under its 4 rows of trees, between which, at considerable intervals, a few gas lamps struggled in vain to light the deep shadows. One of them threw a dim light over a portion of the house, and Sholmes perceived the "To Let" sign posted on the gate, the neglected walks which encircled the small lawn, and the large bare windows of the vacant house. "I suppose," he said to himself, "the house has been unoccupied since the death of the Baron. Ah, if I could only get in and view the scene of the murder." No sooner did the idea occur to him than he sought to put it in execution. But how could he manage it? He could not climb over the gate. It was too high. So he took from his pocket an electric lantern and a skeleton key which he always carried. Then, to his great surprise, he discovered that the gate was not locked. In fact, it was open about 3 or 4 inches. He entered the garden and was careful to leave the gate as he had found it, partly open, but he had not taken many steps from the gate when he stopped. He had seen a light pass one of the windows on the 2nd floor. He saw the light pass a 2nd window and a 3rd, but he saw nothing else, except a silhouette outlined on the walls of the rooms. The light descended to the 1st floor, and for a long time wandered from room to room. Who the deuce is walking, at 1 o'clock in the morning, through the house in which the Baron d'Autrec was killed? Herlock Sholmes asked himself, deeply interested. There was only one way to find out, and that was to enter the house himself. He did not hesitate, but started for the door of the house. However, at the moment when he crossed the streak of gaslight that came from the street lamp, the man must have seen him, for the light in the house was suddenly extinguished, and Herlock Sholmes did not see it again. Softly, he tried the door. It was open, also. Hearing no sound, he advanced through the hallway, encountered the foot of the stairs, and ascended to the first floor. Here there was the same silence, the same darkness. He entered one of the rooms and approached a window through which came a feeble light from the outside. On looking through the window, he saw the man, who had no doubt descended by another stairway and escaped by another door. The man was threading his way through the shrubbery which bordered the wall that separated the two gardens. "The deuce!" exclaimed Sholmes. "He is going to escape." He hastened down the stairs and leapt over the steps in his eagerness to cut off the man's retreat. But he did not see anyone, and owing to the darkness, it was several seconds before he was able to distinguish a bulky form moving through the shrubbery. This gave the Englishman food for reflection. Why had the man not made his escape, which he could have done so easily? Had he remained in order to watch the movements of the intruder who had disturbed him in his mysterious work? At all events, concluded Sholmes, it is not Lupin. He would be more adroit. It may be one of his men. For several minutes, Herlock Sholmes remained motionless, with his gaze fixed on the adversary who in his turn was watching the detective. But as that adversary had become passive, and as the Englishman was not one to consume his time in idle waiting, he examined his revolver to see if it was in good working order, removed his knife from its sheath, and walked toward the enemy with that cool effrontery and scorn of danger for which he had become famous. He heard a clicking sound. It was his adversary, preparing his revolver. Herlock Sholmes dashed boldly into the thicket and grappled with his foe. There was a sharp, desperate struggle, in the course of which Sholmes suspected that the man was trying to draw a knife. But the Englishman, believing his antagonist to be an accomplice of Arsène Lupin and anxious to win the first trick in the game with that redoubtable foe, fought with unusual strength and determination. He hurled his adversary to the ground, held him there with the weight of his body, and gripping him by the throat with one hand, he used his free hand to take out his electric lantern, press the button, and throw the light over the face of his prisoner. "Wilson!" he exclaimed, in amazement. "Herlock Sholmes," stammered a weak, stifled voice. For a long time, they remained silent, astounded, foolish. The shriek of an automobile rent the air. A slight breeze stirred the leaves. Suddenly, Herlock Sholmes seized his friend by the shoulders and shook him violently as he cried, "What are you doing here? Tell me, what? Did I tell you to hide in the bushes and spy on me?" "Spy on you," muttered Wilson. "Why, I didn't know it was you." "But what are you doing here? You ought to be in bed." "I was in bed." "You ought to be asleep." "I was asleep." "Well, what brought you here?" asked Sholmes. "Your letter." "My letter? I don't understand." "Yes, a messenger brought it to me at the hotel." "From me? Are you crazy?" "It is true. I swear it." "Where is the letter?" Wilson handed him a sheet of paper, which he read by the light of his lantern. It was as follows. "Wilson, come at once to Avenue Henri Martin. The house is empty. Inspect the whole place and make an exact plan. Then return to hotel. Herlock Sholmes." "I was measuring the rooms," said Wilson, "when I saw a shadow in the garden. I had only one idea. That was to seize the shadow. The idea was excellent. But remember this, Wilson. Whenever you receive a letter from me, be sure it is my handwriting and not a forgery." "Ah," exclaimed Wilson, as the truth dawned on him. "Then the letter wasn't from you?" "No." "Who sent it then?" "Arsène Lupin." "Why? For what purpose?" asked Wilson. "I don't know, and that's what worries me. I don't understand why he took the trouble to disturb you. Of course, if he had sent me on such a foolish errand, I wouldn't be surprised. But what was his object in disturbing you?" "I must hurry back to the hotel." "So must I, Wilson." They arrived at the gate. Wilson, who was ahead, took hold of it and pulled. "Ah, you closed it," he said. "No, I left it partly open." Sholmes tried the gate. Then, alarmed, he examined the lock. An oath escaped him. "Good God! It is locked, locked with a key." He shook the gate with all his strength. Then, realizing the futility of his efforts, he dropped his arms, discouraged, and muttered in a jerky manner, "I can see it all now. It is Lupin." He foresaw that I would leave the train at Creel, and he prepared this neat little trap for me in case I should commence my investigation this evening. Moreover, he was kind enough to send me a companion to share my captivity, all done to make me lose a day, and perhaps also to teach me to mind my own business. "Do you mean to say we are prisoners?" "Exactly. Herlock Sholmes and Wilson are the prisoners of Arsène Lupin. It's a bad beginning, but he laughs best who laughs last." Wilson seized Sholmes's arm and exclaimed, "Look! Look up there! A light!" A light shone through one of the windows of the first floor. Both of them ran to the house, and each ascended by the stairs he had used on coming out a short time before, and they met again at the entrance to the lighted chamber. A small piece of a candle was burning in the center of the room. Beside it, there was a basket containing a bottle, a roasted chicken, and a loaf of bread. Sholmes was greatly amused and laughed heartily. "Wonderful! We are invited to supper. It is really an enchanted place, a genuine fairyland. Come, Wilson, cheer up. This is not a funeral. It's all very funny." "Are you quite sure it is so very funny?" asked Wilson in a lugubrious tone. "Am I sure?" exclaimed Sholmes, with a gaiety that was too boisterous to be natural. "Why, to tell the truth, it's the funniest thing I ever saw. It's a jolly good comedy. What a master of sarcasm this Arsène Lupin is. He makes a fool of you with the utmost grace and delicacy. I wouldn't miss this feast for all the money in the Bank of England. Come, Wilson, you grieve me. You should display that nobility of character which rises superior to misfortune. I don't see that you have any cause for complaint, really, I don't." After a time, by dint of good humor and sarcasm, he managed to restore Wilson to his normal mood and make him swallow a morsel of chicken and a glass of wine. But when the candle went out and they prepared to spend the night there, with the bare floor for a mattress and the hard wall for a pillow, the harsh and ridiculous side of the situation was impressed upon them. That particular incident will not form a pleasant page in the memoirs of the famous detective. Next morning, Wilson awoke, stiff and cold. A slight noise attracted his attention. Herlock Sholmes was kneeling on the floor, critically examining some grains of sand and studying some chalk marks, now almost effaced, which formed certain figures and numbers, which figures he entered in his notebook. Accompanied by Wilson, who was deeply interested in the work, he examined each room and found similar chalk marks in 2 other apartments. He noticed also 2 circles on the oaken panels, an arrow on a wainscot, and 4 figures on 4 steps of the stairs. At the end of an hour, Wilson said, "The figures are correct, aren't they?" "I don't know, but at all events, "They mean something," replied Sholmes, who had forgotten the discomforts of the night in the joy created by his new discoveries. "It is quite obvious," said Wilson. "They represent the number of pieces in the floor." "Ah, yes, and the two circles indicate that the panels are false, as you can readily ascertain, and the arrow points in the direction in which the panels move." Herlock Sholmes looked at Wilson in astonishment. "Ah, my dear friend, how do you know all that? Your clairvoyance makes my poor ability in that direction look quite insignificant." "Oh, it is very simple," said Wilson, inflated with pride. "I examined those marks last night, according to your instructions, or rather, according to the instructions of Arsène Lupin, since he wrote the letter you sent to me." At that moment, Wilson faced a greater danger than he had during his struggle in the garden with Herlock Sholmes. The latter now felt a furious desire to strangle him, but dominating his feelings, Sholmes made a grimace which was intended for a smile and said, "Quite so, Wilson. You have done well, and your work shows commendable progress. But tell me, have you exercised your powers of observation and analysis on any other points? I might profit by your deductions." "Oh no, I went no farther." "That's a pity. Your debut was such a promising one, but since that is all, we may as well go." "Go? But how can we get out?" "The way all honest people go out, through the gate." "But it is locked." "It will be opened." "By whom?" "Please call the two policemen who are strolling down the avenue." "But what?" "It is very humiliating. What will be said when it becomes known that Herlock Sholmes and Wilson were the prisoners of Arsène Lupin?" "Of course I understand. They will roar with laughter," replied Herlock Sholmes in a dry voice and with frowning features. "But we can't set up housekeeping in this place." "And you will not try to find another way out?" "No." "But the man who brought us the basket of provisions did not cross the garden. Coming or going, there is some other way out. Let us look for it, and not bother with the police." "Your argument is sound, but you forget that all the detectives in Paris have been trying to find it for the last 6 months, and that I searched the house from top to bottom while you were asleep. Ah, my dear Wilson, we have not been accustomed to pursue such game as Arsène Lupin. He leaves no trail behind him." At 11 o'clock, Herlock Sholmes and Wilson were liberated and conducted to the nearest police station, where the commissary, after subjecting them to a severe examination, released them with an affectation of goodwill that was quite exasperating. "I am very sorry, monsieur, that this unfortunate incident has occurred. You will have a very poor opinion of French hospitality. Mon Dieu, what a night you must have passed! Ah, that rascally Lupin is no respecter of persons." They took a carriage to their hotel. At the office, Wilson asked for the key of his room. After some search, the clerk replied, much astonished, "But, monsieur, you have given up the room." "I gave it up? When?" "This morning, by the letter your friend brought here." "What friend?" "The gentleman who brought your letter." "Ah, your card is still attached to the letter. Here they are." Wilson looked at them. Certainly, it was one of his cards, and the letter was in his handwriting. "Good Lord," he muttered. "This is another of his tricks," and he added aloud, "Where is my luggage?" "Your friend took it." "Ah, and you gave it to him?" "Certainly, on the strength of your letter and card." Of course, of course." They left the hotel and walked, slowly and thoughtfully, through the Champs-Élysées. The avenue was bright and cheerful beneath a clear autumn sun. The air was mild and pleasant. At one point, Herlock Sholmes lighted his pipe. Then Wilson spoke. "I can't understand you, Sholmes. You are so calm and unruffled. They play with you as a cat plays with a mouse, and yet you do not say a word." Sholmes stopped as he replied, "Wilson, I was thinking of your card." "Well, the point is this. Here is a man who, in view of a possible struggle with us, procures specimens of our handwriting, and who holds in his possession one or more of your cards. Now, have you considered how much precaution and skill those facts represent?" "Well, well, Wilson, to overcome an enemy so well prepared and so thoroughly equipped requires the infinite shrewdness of a Herlock Sholmes. And yet, as you have seen, Wilson, I have lost the first round." At 6 o'clock, the Echo de France published the following article in its evening edition. "This morning, Monsieur Tinard, Commissary of Police in the 16th District, released Herlock Sholmes and his friend Wilson, both of whom had been locked in the house of the late Baron d'Autrec, where they spent a very pleasant night, thanks to the thoughtful care and attention of Arsène Lupin. In addition to their other troubles, these gentlemen have been robbed of their valises, and in consequence thereof, they have entered a formal complaint against Arsène Lupin. Arsène Lupin, satisfied that he has given them a mild reproof, hopes these gentlemen will not force him to resort to more stringent measures." "Bah!" exclaimed Herlock Sholmes, crushing the paper in his hands. "That is only child's play, and that is the only criticism I have to make of Arsène Lupin. He plays to the gallery. There is that much of the fakir in him. Ah, Sholmes, you are a wonderful man. You have such a command over your temper. Nothing ever disturbs you." "No, nothing disturbs me," replied Sholmes in a voice that trembled from rage. "Besides, what's the use of losing my temper? I am quite confident of the final result. I shall have the last word." Chapter 4. Light in the Darkness. However well-tempered a man's character may be, and Herlock Sholmes is one of those men over whom ill fortune has little or no hold, there are circumstances wherein the most courageous combatant feels the necessity of marshalling his forces before risking the chances of a battle. "I shall take a vacation today," said Sholmes. "And what shall I do?" asked Wilson. "You, Wilson, let me see. You can buy some underwear and linen to replenish our wardrobe, while I take a rest." "Very well, Sholmes. I will watch while you sleep." Wilson uttered these words with all the importance of a sentinel on guard at the outpost, and therefore exposed to the greatest danger. His chest was expanded. His muscles were tense. Assuming a shrewd look, he scrutinized officially the little room in which they had fixed their abode. "Very well, Wilson. You can watch. I shall occupy myself in the preparation of a line of attack more appropriate to the methods of the enemy we are called upon to meet. Do you see, Wilson, we have been deceived in this fellow Lupin. My opinion is that we must commence at the very beginning of this affair, and even before that, if possible. But have we sufficient time?" "9 days, dear boy. That is 5 too many." The Englishman spent the entire afternoon in smoking and sleeping. He did not enter upon his new plan of attack until the following day. Then he said, "Wilson, I am ready. Let us attack the enemy." "Lead on, Macduff," exclaimed Wilson, full of martial ardor. "I wish to fight in the front rank. Oh, have no fear. I shall do credit to my king and country, for I am an Englishman." In the first place, Sholmes had 3 long and important interviews with Monsieur Detinan, whose rooms he examined with the greatest care and precision, with Suzanne Gerbois, whom he questioned in regard to the blonde lady, and with Sister Auguste, who had retired to the convent of the Visitandines since the murder of Baron d'Autrec. At each of these interviews, Wilson had remained outside, and each time he asked, "Satisfactory?" "Quite so. I was sure we were on the right track." They paid a visit to the two houses adjoining that of the late Baron d'Autrec in the Avenue Henri Martin. Then they visited the Rue Clapeyron, and while he was examining the front of number 25, Sholmes said, "All these houses must be connected by secret passages, but I can't find them." For the first time in his life, Wilson doubted the omnipotence of his famous associate. Why did he now talk so much and accomplish so little? "Why?" exclaimed Sholmes, in answer to Wilson's secret thought. "Because with this fellow Lupin, a person has to work in the dark, and instead of deducting the truth from established facts, a man must extract it from his own brain, and afterward learn if it is supported by the facts in the case." "But what about the secret passages?" "They must exist. But even though I should discover them, and thus learn how Arsène Lupin made his entrance to the lawyer's house, and how the blonde lady escaped from the house of Baron d'Autrec after the murder, what good would it do? How would it help me? Would it furnish me with a weapon of attack?" "Let us attack him just the same," exclaimed Wilson, who had scarcely uttered these words when he jumped back with a cry of alarm. Something had fallen at their feet. It was a bag filled with sand, which might have caused them serious injury if it had struck them. Sholmes looked up. Some men were working on a scaffolding attached to the balcony at the 5th floor of the house. He said, "We were lucky. One step more, and that heavy bag would have fallen on our heads. I wonder if—" Moved by a sudden impulse, he rushed into the house, up the 5 flights of stairs, rang the bell, pushed his way into the apartment, to the great surprise and alarm of the servant who came to the door, and made his way to the balcony in front of the house. But there was no one there. "Where are the workmen who were here a moment ago?" he asked the servant. "They have just gone." "Which way did they go?" "By the servants' stairs." Sholmes leaned out of the window. He saw 2 men leaving the house, carrying bicycles. They mounted them and quickly disappeared around the corner. "How long have they been working on this scaffolding?" "Those men? Only since this morning. It's their first day." Sholmes returned to the street and joined Wilson. Together they returned to the hotel, and thus the second day ended in a mournful silence. On the following day, their program was almost similar. They sat together on a bench in the Avenue Henri Martin, much to Wilson's disgust, who did not find it amusing to spend long hours watching the house in which the tragedy had occurred. "What do you expect, Sholmes? That Arsène Lupin will walk out of the house?" "No." "That the blonde lady will make her appearance?" "No." "What then?" "I am looking for something to occur, some slight incident that will furnish me with a clue to work on. And if it does not occur, then I must myself create the spark that will set fire to the powder. A solitary incident, and that of a disagreeable nature, broke the monotony of the forenoon. A gentleman was riding along the avenue when his horse suddenly turned aside in such a manner that it ran against the bench on which they were sitting, and struck Sholmes a slight blow on the shoulder. "Ha!" exclaimed Sholmes. "A little more, and I would have had a broken shoulder." The gentleman struggled with his horse. The Englishman drew his revolver and pointed it, but Wilson seized his arm and said, "Don't be foolish. What are you going to do? Kill the man?" "Leave me alone, Wilson. Let go." During the brief struggle between Sholmes and Wilson, the stranger rode away. "Now you can shoot," said Wilson triumphantly, when the horseman was at some distance. "Wilson, you're an idiot. Don't you understand that the man is an accomplice of Arsène Lupin? Sholmes was trembling from rage. Wilson stammered pitifully, "What? That man? An accomplice?" "Yes, the same as the workman who tried to drop the bag of sand on us yesterday." "It can't be possible." "Possible or not, there was only one way to prove it." "By killing the man?" "No, by killing the horse. If you hadn't grabbed my arm, I should have captured one of Lupin's accomplices. Now, do you understand the folly of your act?" Throughout the afternoon, both men were morose. They did not speak a word to each other. At 5 o'clock, they visited the Rue Clapeyron, but were careful to keep at a safe distance from the houses. However, 3 young men who were passing through the street, arm in arm, singing, ran against Sholmes and Wilson and refused to let them pass. Sholmes, who was in an ill humor, contested the right of way with them. After a brief struggle, Sholmes resorted to his fists. He struck one of the men a hard blow on the chest, another a blow in the face, and thus subdued 2 of his adversaries. Thereupon, the 3 of them took to their heels and disappeared. "Ah," exclaimed Sholmes, "that does me good. I needed a little exercise." But Wilson was leaning against the wall. Sholmes said, "What's the matter, old chap? You're quite pale." Wilson pointed to his left arm, which hung inert, and stammered, "I don't know what it is. My arm pains me." "Very much. Is it serious?" "Yes, I am afraid so." He tried to raise his arm, but it was helpless. Sholmes felt it, gently at first, then in a rougher way. "To see how badly it was hurt," he said. He concluded that Wilson was really hurt, so he led him to a neighboring pharmacy, where a closer examination revealed the fact that the arm was broken and that Wilson was a candidate for the hospital. In the meantime, they bared his arm and applied some remedies to ease his suffering. "Come, come, old chap, cheer up," said Sholmes, who was holding Wilson's arm. "In 5 or 6 weeks you will be all right again. But I will pay them back. The rascals, especially Lupin, for this is his work. No doubt of that. I swear to you, if ever—" He stopped suddenly, dropped the arm, which caused Wilson such an access of pain that he almost fainted, and striking his forehead, Sholmes said, "Wilson, I have an idea. You know, I have one occasionally." He stood for a moment, silent, with staring eyes, and then muttered in short, sharp phrases, "Yes, that's it. That will explain all. Right at my feet. And I didn't see it. Ah, parbleu, I should have thought of it before. Wilson, I shall have good news for you." Abruptly leaving his old friend, Sholmes ran into the street and went directly to the house known as number 25. On one of the stones, to the right of the door, he read this inscription, "Destange, Architect, 1875. There was a similar inscription on the house numbered 23. Of course, there was nothing unusual in that. But what might be read on the houses in the avenue Henri Martin? A carriage was passing. He engaged it and directed the driver to take him to number 134 Avenue Henri Martin. He was roused to a high pitch of excitement. He stood up in the carriage and urged the horse to greater speed. He offered extra pourboires to the driver. Quicker! Quicker! How great was his anxiety as they turned from the Rue de la Pompe. Had he caught a glimpse of the truth at last? On one of the stones of the late Baron's house, he read the words, "Destange, Architect, 1874." And a similar inscription appeared on the 2 adjoining houses. The reaction was such that he settled down in the seat of the carriage, trembling from joy. At last, a tiny ray of light had penetrated the dark shadows which encompassed these mysterious crimes. In the vast sombre forest, wherein 1,000 pathways crossed and recrossed, he had discovered the first clue to the track followed by the enemy. He entered a branch post office and obtained telephonic connection with the Château de Crozon. The Countess answered the telephone call. "Hello, is that you, madame?" "Monsieur Sholmes, isn't it? Everything going all right?" "Quite well, but I wish to ask you one question." "Hello." "Yes, I hear you." "Tell me, when was the Château de Crozon built?" "It was destroyed by fire and rebuilt about 30 years ago." "Who built it and in what year?" "There is an inscription on the front of the house which reads, Lucien Destange, architect, 1877. "Thank you, madame. That is all. Goodbye." He went away, murmuring, "Destange, Lucien Destange. That name has a familiar sound." He noticed a public reading room, entered, consulted a dictionary of modern biography, and copied the following information. Lucien Destange, born 1840, Grand Prix de Rome, officer of the Legion of Honor, author of several valuable books on architecture, etc. Then he returned to the pharmacy and found that Wilson had been taken to the hospital. There, Sholmes found him with his arm in splints and shivering with fever. "Victory, victory," cried Sholmes. "I hold one end of the thread." "Of what thread?" "The one that leads to victory. I shall now be walking on solid ground, where there will be footprints, clues." "Cigarette ashes?" asked Wilson, whose curiosity had overcome his pain. "And many other things. Just think, Wilson, I have found the mysterious link which unites the different adventures in which the blonde lady played a part. Why did Lupin select those 3 houses for the scenes of his exploits?" "Yes, why?" "Because those 3 houses were built by the same architect. That was an easy problem, eh?" "Of course. But who would have thought of it?" "No one but you. And who, except I, knows that the same architect, by the use of analogous plans, has rendered it possible for a person to execute 3 distinct acts, which, though miraculous in appearance, are, in reality, quite simple and easy? That was a stroke of good luck. And it was time, dear boy, as I was becoming very impatient. You know, this is our 4th day." "Out of 10. "Oh, after this—" Sholmes was excited, delighted, and gayer than usual. "And when I think that these rascals might have attacked me in the street and broken my arm, just as they did yours. Isn't that so, Wilson?" Wilson simply shivered at the horrible thought. Sholmes continued, "We must profit by the lesson. I can see, Wilson, that we were wrong to try and fight Lupin in the open and leave ourselves exposed to his attacks." "I can see it and feel it too in my broken arm," said Wilson. "You have one consolation, Wilson. That is, that I escaped. Now, I must be doubly cautious. In an open fight, he will defeat me. But if I can work in the dark, unseen by him, I have the advantage, no matter how strong his forces may be. Ganimard might be of some assistance." "Never. On the day that I can truly say, Arsène Lupin is there, I show you the quarry and how to catch it. I shall go and see Ganimard at one of the 2 addresses that he gave me, his residence in the Rue Pergolese, or at the Suisse Taverne in the Place du Châtelet. But until that time, I shall work alone." He approached the bed, placed his hand on Wilson's shoulder, on the sore one, of course, and said to him, "Take care of yourself, old fellow. Henceforth, your role will be to keep 2 or 3 of Arsène Lupin's men busy watching here in vain for my return to inquire about your health. It is a secret mission for you, eh?" "Yes, and I shall do my best to fulfill it conscientiously." "Then you do not expect to come here any more?" What for? Asked Sholmes. I don't know. Of course, I am getting on as well as possible. But Herlock, do me a last service. Give me a drink. A drink? Yes, I am dying of thirst. And with my fever, to be sure, directly. He made a pretense of getting some water, perceived a package of tobacco, lighted his pipe, and then, as if he had not heard his friend's request, he went away, whilst Wilson uttered a mute prayer for the inaccessible water. Monsieur Destange. The servant eyed from head to foot the person to whom he had opened the door of the house, the magnificent house that stood at the corner of the Place Malesherbes and the Rue Montchanin, and at the sight of the man with grey hairs, badly shaved, dressed in a shabby black coat, with a body as ill-formed and ungracious as his face, he replied with the disdain which he thought the occasion warranted. Monsieur Destange may or may not be at home. That depends. Has Monsieur a card? Monsieur did not have a card, but he had a letter of introduction, and after the servant had taken the letter to Monsieur Destange, he was conducted into the presence of that gentleman who was sitting in a large circular room or rotunda which occupied one of the wings of the house. It was a library and contained a profusion of books and architectural drawings. When the stranger entered, the architect said to him, "You are Monsieur Stickman?" "Yes, monsieur." "My secretary tells me that he is ill and has sent you to continue the general catalogue of the books which he commenced under my direction, and more particularly the catalogue of German books. Are you familiar with that kind of work?" "Yes, monsieur, quite so," he replied, with a strong German accent. Under those circumstances, the bargain was soon concluded, and Monsieur Destange commenced work with his new secretary. Herlock Sholmes had gained access to the house. In order to escape the vigilance of Arsène Lupin and gain admittance to the house occupied by Lucien Destange and his daughter Clotilde, the famous detective had been compelled to resort to a number of stratagems and, under a variety of names, to ingratiate himself into the good graces and confidence of a number of persons. In short, to live, during 48 hours, a most complicated life. During that time, he had acquired the following information. Monsieur Destange, having retired from active business on account of his failing health, now lived amongst the many books he had accumulated on the subject of architecture. He derived infinite pleasure in viewing and handling those dusty old volumes. His daughter Clotilde was considered eccentric. She passed her time in another part of the house and never went out. Of course, Sholmes said to himself, as he wrote in a register the titles of the books which Monsieur Destange dictated to him, all that is vague and incomplete, but it is quite a long step in advance. I shall surely solve one of these absorbing problems. Is Monsieur Destange associated with Arsène Lupin? Does he continue to see him? Are the papers relating to the construction of the three houses still in existence? Will those papers not furnish me with the location of other houses of similar construction which Arsène Lupin and his associates will plunder in the future? Monsieur Destange, an accomplice of Arsène Lupin, that venerable man, an officer of the Legion of Honor, working in league with a burglar, such an idea was absurd. Besides, if we concede that such a complicity exists, how could Monsieur Destange 30 years ago have possibly foreseen the thefts of Arsène Lupin, who was then an infant? No matter, the Englishman was implacable. With his marvelous scent and that instinct which never fails him, he felt that he was in the heart of some strange mystery. Ever since he first entered the house, he had been under the influence of that impression, and yet he could not define the grounds on which he based his suspicions. Up to the morning of the second day, he had not made any significant discovery. At 2 o'clock of that day, he saw Clotilde Destange for the first time. She came to the library in search of a book. She was about 30 years of age, a brunette, slow and silent in her movements, with features imbued with that expression of indifference which is characteristic of people who live a secluded life. She exchanged a few words with her father and then retired, without even looking at Sholmes. The afternoon dragged along monotonously. At 5 o'clock, Destange announced his intention to go out. Sholmes was alone on the circular gallery that was constructed about 10 feet above the floor of the rotunda. It was almost dark. He was on the point of going out when he heard a slight sound and, at the same time, experienced the feeling that there was someone in the room. Several minutes passed before he saw or heard anything more. Then he shuddered. A shadowy form emerged from the gloom, quite close to him, upon the balcony. It seemed incredible. How long had this mysterious visitor been there? Whence did he come? The strange man descended the steps and went directly to a large oaken cupboard. Sholmes was a keen observer of the man's movements. He watched him searching amongst the papers with which the cupboard was filled. What was he looking for? Then the door opened and Mademoiselle Destange entered, speaking to someone who was following her. "So you have decided not to go out, father? Then I will make a light. 1 second. Do not move." The strange man closed the cupboard and hid in the embrasure of a large window, drawing the curtains together. Did Mademoiselle Destange not see him? Did she not hear him? Calmly, she turned on the electric lights. She and her father sat down close to each other. She opened a book she had brought with her and commenced to read. After the lapse of a few minutes, she said, "Your secretary has gone." "Yes, I don't see him." "Do you like him as well as you did at first?" she asked, as if she were not aware of the illness of the real secretary and his replacement by Stickman. "Oh, yes." Monsieur Destange's head bobbed from one side to the other. He was asleep. The girl resumed her reading. A moment later, one of the window curtains was pushed back, and the strange man emerged and glided along the wall toward the door, which obliged him to pass behind Destange, but in front of Clotilde, and brought him into the light so that Herlock Sholmes obtained a good view of the man's face. It was Arsène Lupin. The Englishman was delighted. His forecast was verified. He had penetrated to the very heart of the mystery and found Arsène Lupin to be the moving spirit in it. Clotilde had not yet displayed any knowledge of his presence, although it was quite improbable that any movement of the intruder had escaped her notice. Lupin had almost reached the door, and, in fact, his hand was already seeking the doorknob, when his coat brushed against a small table and knocked something to the floor. Monsieur Destange awoke with a start. Arsène Lupin was already standing in front of him, hat in hand, smiling. "Maxime Bermond!" exclaimed Monsieur Destange joyfully. "My dear Maxime, what lucky chance brings you here?" "The wish to see you and Mademoiselle Destange." "When did you return from your journey?" "Yesterday." "You must stay to dinner." "No, thank you, I am sorry, but I have an appointment to dine with some friends at a restaurant." "Come tomorrow, then, Clotilde. You must urge him to come tomorrow. Ah, my dear Maxime, I thought of you many times during your absence." "Really?" "Yes. I went through all my old papers in that cupboard and found our last statement of account." "What account?" "Relating to the Avenue Henri Martin." "Ah, do you keep such papers? What for?" Then the three of them left the room and continued their conversation in a small parlor which adjoined the library. "Is it Lupin?" Sholmes asked himself, in a sudden access of doubt. Certainly, from all appearances, it was he, and yet it was also someone else who resembled Arsène Lupin in certain respects, and who still maintained his own individuality, features, and color of hair. Sholmes could hear Lupin's voice in the adjoining room. He was relating some stories at which Destange laughed heartily, and which even brought a smile to the lips of the melancholy Clotilde. And each of those smiles appeared to be the reward which Arsène Lupin was seeking, and which he was delighted to have secured. His success caused him to redouble his efforts, and insensibly, at the sound of that clear and happy voice, Clotilde's face brightened and lost that cold and listless expression which usually pervaded it. They love each other, thought Sholmes, but what the deuce can there be in common between Clotilde Destange and Maxime Bermond? Does she know that Maxime is none other than Arsène Lupin? Until 7 o'clock, Sholmes was an anxious listener, seeking to profit by the conversation. Then, with infinite precaution, he descended from the gallery, crept along the side of the room to the door, in such a manner that the people in the adjoining room did not see him. When he reached the street, Sholmes satisfied himself that there was neither an automobile nor a cab waiting there. Then he slowly limped along the boulevard Malesherbes. He turned into an adjacent street, donned the overcoat which he had carried on his arm, altered the shape of his hat, assumed an upright carriage, and thus transformed, returned to a place whence he could watch the door of Monsieur Destange's house. In a few minutes, Arsène Lupin came out and proceeded to walk toward the center of Paris by way of the Rue de Constantinople and London. Herlock Sholmes followed at a distance of 100 paces. Exciting moments for the Englishman. He sniffed the air eagerly, like a hound following a fresh scent. It seemed to him a delightful thing thus to follow his adversary. It was no longer Herlock Sholmes who was being watched, but Arsène Lupin, the invisible Arsène Lupin. He held him, so to speak, within the grasp of his eye, by an imperceptible bond that nothing could break, and he was pleased to think that the quarry belonged to him. But he soon observed a suspicious circumstance. In the intervening space between him and Arsène Lupin, he noticed several people traveling in the same direction, particularly two husky fellows in slouch hats on the left side of the street, and two others on the right, wearing caps and smoking cigarettes. Of course, their presence in that vicinity may have been the result of chance, but Sholmes was more astonished when he observed that the four men stopped when Lupin entered a tobacco shop, and still more surprised when the four men started again after Lupin emerged from the shop, each keeping to his own side of the street. "Curse it," muttered Sholmes. "He is being followed." He was annoyed at the idea that others were on the trail of Arsène Lupin, that someone might deprive him, not of the glory, he cared little for that, but of the immense pleasure of capturing, single-handed, the most formidable enemy he had ever met. And he felt that he was not mistaken. The men presented to Sholmes's experienced eye the appearance and manner of those who, while regulating their gait to that of another, wished to present a careless and natural air. "Is this some of Ganimard's work?" muttered Sholmes. "Is he playing me false?" He felt inclined to speak to one of the men with a view of acting in concert with him. But as they were now approaching the boulevard, the crowd was becoming denser, and he was afraid he might lose sight of Lupin. So he quickened his pace and turned into the boulevard just in time to see Lupin ascending the steps of the Hungarian restaurant at the corner of the Rue du Helder. The door of the restaurant was open, so that Sholmes, while sitting on a bench on the other side of the boulevard, could see Lupin take a seat at a table, luxuriously appointed and decorated with flowers, at which 3 gentlemen and 2 ladies of elegant appearance were already seated, and who extended to Lupin a hearty greeting. Sholmes now looked about for the 4 men, and perceived them amongst a crowd of people who were listening to a gypsy orchestra that was playing in a neighboring café. It was a curious thing that they were paying no attention to Arsène Lupin, but seemed to be friendly with the people around them. One of them took a cigarette from his pocket and approached a gentleman who wore a frock coat and silk hat. The gentleman offered the other his cigar for a light, and Sholmes had the impression that they talked to each other much longer than the occasion demanded. Finally, the gentleman approached the Hungarian restaurant, entered and looked around. When he caught sight of Lupin, he advanced and spoke to him for a moment, then took a seat at an adjoining table. Sholmes now recognized this gentleman as the horseman who had tried to run him down in the avenue Henri Martin. Then Sholmes understood that these men were not tracking Arsène Lupin. They were a part of his band. They were watching over his safety. They were his bodyguard, his satellites, his vigilant escort. Wherever danger threatened Lupin, these confederates were at hand to avert it, ready to defend him. The 4 men were accomplices. The gentleman in the frock coat was an accomplice. These facts furnished the Englishman with food for reflection. Would he ever succeed in capturing that inaccessible individual? What unlimited power was possessed by such an organization, directed by such a chief? He tore a leaf from his notebook, wrote a few lines in pencil, which he placed in an envelope, and said to a boy about 15 years of age who was sitting on the bench beside him, "Here, my boy, take a carriage and deliver this letter to the cashier of the Suisse Tavern, Place du Châtelet. Be quick." He gave him a 5-franc piece. The boy disappeared. A half-hour passed away. The crowd had grown larger, and Sholmes perceived only at intervals the accomplices of Arsène Lupin. Then someone brushed against him and whispered in his ear, "Well, what is it, Monsieur Sholmes?" "Ah, it is you, Ganimard?" "Yes, I received your note at the tavern. What's the matter?" "He is there." "What do you mean?" "There. In the restaurant. Lean to the right. Do you see him now?" "No. He is pouring a glass of champagne for the lady." "That is not Lupin." "Yes, it is." "But I tell you—" "Ah, yet it may be. It looks a great deal like him," said Ganimard naively. "And the others? Accomplices?" "No. The lady sitting beside him is Lady Cliveden. The other is the Duchess de Cleath. The gentleman sitting opposite Lupin is the Spanish ambassador to London." Ganimard took a step forward. Sholmes retained him. "Be prudent. You are alone." "So is he?" "No, he has a number of men on the boulevard mounting guard, and inside the restaurant, that gentleman. And I, when I take Arsène Lupin by the collar and announce his name, I shall have the entire room on my side and all the waiters. I should prefer to have a few policemen. But, Monsieur Sholmes, we have no choice. We must catch him when we can." He was right. Sholmes knew it. It was better to take advantage of the opportunity and make the attempt. Sholmes simply gave this advice to Ganimard: "Conceal your identity as long as possible." Sholmes glided behind a newspaper kiosk, whence he could still watch Lupin, who was leaning toward Lady Cliveden, talking and smiling. Ganimard crossed the street, hands in his pockets, as if he were going down the boulevard, but when he reached the opposite sidewalk, he turned quickly and bounded up the steps of the restaurant. There was a shrill whistle. Ganimard ran against the head waiter, who had suddenly planted himself in the doorway and now pushed Ganimard back with a show of indignation, as if he were an intruder whose presence would bring disgrace upon the restaurant. Ganimard was surprised. At the same moment, the gentleman in the frock coat came out. He took the part of the detective and entered into an exciting argument with the waiter. Both of them hung on to Ganimard, one pushing him in, the other pushing him out in such a manner that despite all his efforts and despite his furious protestations, the unfortunate detective soon found himself on the sidewalk. The struggling men were surrounded by a crowd. Two policemen, attracted by the noise, tried to force their way through the crowd, but encountered a mysterious resistance and could make no headway through the opposing backs and pressing shoulders of the mob. But suddenly, as if by magic, the crowd parted and the passage to the restaurant was clear. The head waiter, recognizing his mistake, was profuse in his apologies. The gentleman in the frock coat ceased his efforts on behalf of the detective. The crowd dispersed, the policeman passed on, and Ganimard hastened to the table at which the 6 guests were sitting. But now there were only 5. He looked around. The only exit was the door. "The person who was sitting here," he cried to the 5 astonished guests. "Where is he?" "Monsieur Destro?" "No, Arsène Lupin." A waiter approached and said, "The gentleman went upstairs." Ganimard rushed up in the hope of finding him. The upper floor of the restaurant contained private dining rooms and had a private stairway leading to the boulevard. "No use looking for him now," muttered Ganimard. "He is far away by this time." He was not far away, 200 yards at most, in the Madeleine Bastille omnibus, which was rolling along very peacefully with its 3 horses across the Place de l'Opéra toward the Boulevard des Capucines. 2 sturdy fellows were talking together on the platform. On the roof of the omnibus near the stairs, an old fellow was sleeping. It was Herlock Sholmes. With bobbing head, rocked by the movement of the vehicle, the Englishman said to himself, "If Wilson could see me now, how proud he would be of his collaborator. Bah! It was easy to foresee that the game was lost as soon as the man whistled. Nothing could be done but watch the exits and see that our man did not escape. Really, Lupin makes life exciting and interesting." At the terminal point, Herlock Sholmes, by leaning over, saw Arsène Lupin leaving the omnibus, and as he passed in front of the men who formed his bodyguard, Sholmes heard him say, "À l'étoile." "À l'étoile, exactly. A rendezvous. I shall be there," thought Sholmes. "I will follow the 2 men." Lupin took an automobile, but the men walked the entire distance, followed by Sholmes. They stopped at a narrow house, number 40, Rue Chalgrin, and rang the bell. Sholmes took his position in the shadow of a doorway, whence he could watch the house in question. A man opened one of the windows of the ground floor and closed the shutters, but the shutters did not reach to the top of the window. The impost was clear. At the end of 10 minutes, a gentleman rang at the same door, and a few minutes later, another man came. A short time afterward, an automobile stopped in front of the house, bringing 2 passengers, Arsène Lupin and a lady concealed beneath a large cloak and a thick veil. "The blonde lady, no doubt," said Sholmes to himself, as the automobile drove away. Herlock Sholmes now approached the house, climbed to the window ledge, and, by standing on tiptoe, he was able to see through the window above the shutters. What did he see? Arsène Lupin, leaning against the mantel, was speaking with considerable animation. The others were grouped around him, listening to him attentively. Amongst them, Sholmes easily recognized the gentleman in the frock coat, and he thought one of the other men resembled the head waiter of the restaurant. As to the blonde lady, she was seated in an armchair with her back to the window. "They are holding a consultation," thought Sholmes. They are worried over the incident at the restaurant and are holding a council of war. Ah, what a master stroke it would be to capture all of them at one fell stroke. One of them, having moved toward the door, Sholmes leaped to the ground and concealed himself in the shadow. The gentleman in the frock coat and the head waiter left the house. A moment later, a light appeared at the windows of the first floor, but the shutters were closed immediately, and the upper part of the house was dark, as well as the lower. Lupin and the woman are on the ground floor. The two confederates live on the upper floor, said Sholmes. Sholmes remained there the greater part of the night, fearing that if he went away, Arsène Lupin might leave during his absence. At 4 o'clock, seeing two policemen at the end of the street, he approached them, explained the situation, and left them to watch the house. He went to Ganimard's residence in the Rue Pergolese and wakened him. "I have him yet," said Sholmes. "Arsène Lupin." "Yes. If you haven't got any better hold on him than you had a while ago, I might as well go back to bed. But we may as well go to the station house." They went to the police station in the Rue Mesnil, and from there to the residence of the commissary, Mondecointre. Then, accompanied by half a dozen policemen, they went to the Rue Chalgrin. "Anything new?" asked Sholmes, addressing the two policemen. "Nothing." It was just breaking day when, after taking necessary measures to prevent escape, the commissary rang the bell and commenced to question the concierge. The woman was greatly frightened at this early morning invasion, and she trembled as she replied that there were no tenants on the ground floor. "What? Not a tenant?" exclaimed Ganimard. "No, but on the first floor there are two men named Leroux. They have furnished the apartment on the ground floor for some country relations." "A gentleman and lady?" "Yes." "Who came here last night?" "Perhaps, but I don't know. I was asleep, but I don't think so, for the key is here. They did not ask for it." With that key, the commissary opened the door of the ground floor apartment. It comprised only 2 rooms, and they were empty. "Impossible!" exclaimed Sholmes. "I saw both of them in this room." "I don't doubt your word," said the commissary, "but they are not here now. Let us go to the first floor. They must be there." The first floor is occupied by 2 men named Leroux. "We will examine the Monsieur Leroux." They all ascended the stairs, and the commissary rang. At the second ring, a man opened the door. He was in his shirt sleeves. Sholmes recognized him as one of Lupin's bodyguard. The man assumed a furious air. "What do you mean by making such a row at this hour of the morning? Waking people up?" But he stopped suddenly, astounded. "God forgive me. Really, gentlemen, I didn't notice who it was. Why, it is Monsieur de Coindre. And you, Monsieur Ganimard, what can I do for you?" Ganimard burst into an uncontrollable fit of laughter, which caused him to bend double and turn black in the face. "Ah, it is you, Leroux," he stammered. "Oh, this is too funny. Leroux, an accomplice of Arsène Lupin. Oh, I shall die. And your brother? Leroux, where is he?" "Edmond," called the man, "it is Ganimard, who has come to visit us." Another man appeared, and at sight of him, Ganimard's mirth redoubled. Oh, we had no idea of this. Ah, my friends, you are in a bad fix now. Who would have ever suspected it?" Turning to Sholmes, Ganimard introduced the man. "Victor Leroux, a detective from our office, one of the best men in the Iron Brigade. Edmond Leroux, chief clerk in the anthropometric service." Chapter 5. An Abduction. Herlock Sholmès said nothing. To protest? To accuse the 2 men? That would be useless. In the absence of evidence which he did not possess, and had no time to seek, no one would believe him. Moreover, he was stifled with rage, but would not display his feelings before the triumphant Ganimard. So he bowed respectfully to the brothers Leroux, guardians of society, and retired. In the vestibule, he turned toward a low door which looked like the entrance to a cellar, and picked up a small red stone. It was a garnet. When he reached the street, he turned and read, on the front of the house, this inscription: Lucien Destange, architect, 1877. The adjoining house, number 42, bore the same inscription. Always the double passage, numbers 40 and 42, have a secret means of communication. Why didn't I think of that? I should have remained with the two policemen. He met the policemen near the corner and said to them, "Two people came out of house number 42 during my absence, didn't they?" "Yes, a gentleman and lady." Ganimard approached. Sholmes took his arm, and as they walked down the street he said, "Monsieur Ganimard, you have had a good laugh, and will no doubt forgive me for the trouble I have caused you." "Oh, there's no harm done. But it was a good joke." "I admit that, but the best jokes have only a short life, and this one can't last much longer." "I hope not. This is now the 7th day, and I can remain only 3 days more. Then I must return to London." "Oh, I wish to ask you to be in readiness, as I may call on you at any hour on Tuesday or Wednesday night." "For an expedition of the same kind as we had tonight?" "Yes, monsieur, the very same." "With what result?" "The capture of Arsène Lupin," replied Sholmes. "Do you think so?" "I swear it on my honor, monsieur." Sholmes bade Ganimard goodbye and went to the nearest hotel for a few hours' sleep, after which, refreshed and with renewed confidence in himself, he returned to the Rue Chalgrin, slipped 2 louis into the hand of the concierge, assured himself that the brothers Leroux had gone out, learned that the house belonged to a Monsieur Harmongit, and provided with a candle, descended to the cellar through the low door near which he had found the garnet. At the bottom of the stairs he found another exactly like it. "I am not mistaken," he thought. "This is the means of communication. Let me see if my skeleton key will open the cellar, reserved for the tenant of the ground floor. Yes, it will. Now, I will examine those cases of wine. Oh, here are some places where the dust has been cleared away, and some footprints on the ground." A slight noise caused him to listen attentively. Quickly he pushed the door shut, blew out his candle, and hid behind a pile of empty wine cases. After a few seconds, he noticed that a portion of the wall swung on a pivot. The light of a lantern was thrown into the cellar. An arm appeared, then a man entered. He was bent over, as if he were searching for something. He felt in the dust with his fingers, and several times he threw something into a cardboard box that he carried in his left hand. Afterward, he obliterated the traces of his footsteps, as well as the footprints left by Lupin and the blonde lady, and he was about to leave the cellar by the same way as he had entered when he uttered a harsh cry and fell to the ground. Sholmes had leaped upon him. It was the work of a moment, and in the simplest manner in the world, the man found himself stretched on the ground, bound and handcuffed. The Englishman leaned over him and said, "Have you anything to say? To tell what you know?" The man replied by such an ironical smile that Sholmes realized the futility of questioning him. So he contented himself by exploring the pockets of his captive, but he found only a bunch of keys, a handkerchief, and the small cardboard box which contained a dozen garnets similar to those which Sholmes had found. Then what was he to do with the man? Wait until his friends came to his help and deliver all of them to the police? What good would that do? What advantage would that give him over Lupin? He hesitated, but an examination of the box decided the question. The box bore this name and address: Leonard, jeweler, Rue de la Paix. He resolved to abandon the man to his fate. He locked the cellar and left the house. At a branch post office, he sent a telegram to Monsieur Destange saying that he could not come that day. Then he went to see the jeweler, and handing him the garnets said, "Madame sent me with these stones. She wishes to have them reset." Sholmes had struck the right key. The jeweler replied, "Certainly, the lady telephoned to me. She said she would be here today." Sholmes established himself on the sidewalk to wait for the lady, but it was 5 o'clock when he saw a heavily veiled lady approach and enter the store. Through the window he saw her place on the counter a piece of antique jewelry set with garnets. She went away almost immediately, walking quickly, and passed through streets that were unknown to the Englishman. As it was now almost dark, he walked close behind her and followed her into a 5-story house of double flats and therefore occupied by numerous tenants. At the second floor, she stopped and entered. 2 minutes later, the Englishman commenced to try the keys on the bunch he had taken from the man in the Rue Chalgrin. The fourth key fitted the lock. Notwithstanding the darkness of the rooms, he perceived that they were absolutely empty, as if unoccupied, and the various doors were standing open so that he could see all the apartments. At the end of a corridor he perceived a ray of light, and by approaching on tiptoe and looking through the glass door, he saw the veiled lady who had removed her hat and dress and was now wearing a velvet dressing gown. The discarded garments were lying on the only chair in the room, and a lighted lamp stood on the mantel. Then he saw her approach the fireplace and press what appeared to be the button of an electric bell. Immediately, the panel to the right of the fireplace moved and slowly glided behind the adjoining panel, thus disclosing an opening large enough for a person to pass through. The lady disappeared through this opening, taking the lamp with her. The operation was a very simple one. Sholmes adopted it and followed the lady. He found himself in total darkness, and immediately he felt his face brushed by some soft articles. He lighted a match and found that he was in a very small room completely filled with cloaks and dresses suspended on hangers. He picked his way through until he reached a door that was draped with a portière. He peeped through, and, behold, the blonde lady was there, under his eyes, and almost within reach of his hand. She extinguished the lamp and turned on the electric lights. Then, for the first time, Herlock Sholmes obtained a good look at her face. He was amazed. The woman, whom he had overtaken after so much trouble and after so many tricks and manoeuvres, was none other than Clotilde Destange. Clotilde Destange, the assassin of the Baron d'Hautrec and the thief who stole the blue diamond. Clotilde Destange, the mysterious friend of Arsène Lupin, and the blonde lady. "Yes, I am only a stupid ass," thought Herlock Sholmes at that moment. "Because Lupin's friend was a blonde and Clotilde is a brunette, I never dreamed that they were the same person. But how could the blonde lady remain a blonde after the murder of the Baron and the theft of the diamond?" Sholmes could see a portion of the room. It was a boudoir, furnished with the most delightful luxury and exquisite taste, and adorned with beautiful tapestries and costly ornaments. A mahogany couch, upholstered in silk, was located on the side of the room, opposite the door at which Sholmes was standing. Clotilde was sitting on this couch, motionless, her face covered by her hands. Then he perceived that she was weeping. Great tears rolled down her pale cheeks and fell, drop by drop, on the velvet corsage. The tears came thick and fast, as if their source were inexhaustible. A door silently opened behind her, and Arsène Lupin entered. He looked at her for a long time without making his presence known. Then he approached her, knelt at her feet, pressed her head to his breast, folded her in his arms, and his actions indicated an infinite measure of love and sympathy. For a time, not a word was uttered, but her tears became less abundant. "I was so anxious to make you happy," he murmured. "I am happy." "No, you are crying. Your tears break my heart, Clotilde." The caressing and sympathetic tone of his voice soothed her, and she listened to him with an eager desire for hope and happiness. Her features were softened by a smile, and yet how sad a smile. He continued to speak in a tone of tender entreaty. "You should not be unhappy, Clotilde. You have no cause to be." She displayed her delicate white hands and said solemnly, "Yes, Maxime, so long as I see those hands, I shall be sad." "Why?" "They are stained with blood." "Hush! Do not think of that," exclaimed Lupin. "The dead is past and gone. Do not resurrect it." And he kissed the long, delicate hand, while she regarded him with a brighter smile, as if each kiss effaced a portion of that dreadful memory. "You must love me, Maxime. You must, because no woman will ever love you as I do. For your sake, I have done many things, not at your order or request, but in obedience to your secret desires. I have done things at which my will and conscience revolted, but there was some unknown power that I could not resist. What I did involuntarily, mechanically, because it helped you, because you wished it, and I am ready to do it again tomorrow, and always." "Ah, Clotilde," he said bitterly, "why did I draw you into my adventurous life? I should have remained the Maxime Bermond that you loved 5 years ago, and not have let you know the other man that I am." She replied in a low voice, "I love the other man also, and I have nothing to regret." "Yes, you regret your past life, the free and happy life you once enjoyed." "I have no regrets when you are here," she said, passionately. "All faults and crimes disappear when I see you. When you are away, I may suffer and weep and be horrified at what I have done. But when you come, it is all forgotten. Your love wipes it all away, and I am happy again. But you must love me." "I do not love you on compulsion, Clotilde. I love you simply because I love you." "Are you sure of it?" "I am just as sure of my own love as I am of yours. Only my life is a very active and exciting one, and I cannot spend as much time with you as I would like, just now." "What is it? Some new danger? Tell me." "Oh, nothing serious. Only—" "Only what?" she asked. "Well, he is on our track." "Who? Herlock Sholmes?" "Yes, it was he who dragged Ganimard into that affair at the Hungarian restaurant. It was he who instructed the 2 policemen to watch the house in the Rue Chalgrin. I have proof of it. Ganimard searched the house this morning, and Sholmes was with him. Besides—" "Besides? What?" "Well, there is another thing. One of our men is missing." "Who?" "Genio, the concierge." "Yes." "Why, I sent him to the Rue Chalgrin this morning to pick up the garnets that fell out of my brooch." "There is no doubt, then, that Sholmes caught him." "No. The garnets were delivered to the jeweler in the Rue de la Paix." "Then what has become of him?" "Oh, Maxime, I am afraid." "There is nothing to be afraid of. But I confess the situation is very serious. What does he know? Where does he hide himself? His isolation is his strong card. I cannot reach him." "What are you going to do?" "Act with extreme prudence, Clotilde. Some time ago, I decided to change my residence to a safer place, and Sholmes's appearance on the scene has prompted me to do so at once. When a man like that is on your track, you must be prepared for the worst. Well, I am making my preparations. Day after tomorrow, Wednesday, I shall move. At noon, it will be finished. At 2 o'clock, I shall leave the place, after removing the last trace of our residence there, which will be no small matter. Until then, well, until then, we must not see each other, and no one must see you, Clotilde. Do not go out. I have no fear for myself, but I have for you. That Englishman cannot possibly reach me. I am not so sure of that. He is a dangerous man. Yesterday, I came here to search the cupboard that contains all of Monsieur Destange's old papers and records. There is danger there. There is danger everywhere. I feel that he is watching us, that he is drawing his net around us closer and closer. It is one of those intuitions which never deceive me. In that case, Maxime, go, and think no more of my tears. I shall be brave and wait patiently until the danger is past. Adieu, Maxime. They held one another for some time in a last fond embrace, and it was she that gently pushed him outside. Sholmes could hear the sound of their voices in the distance. Emboldened by the necessities of the situation and the urgent need of bringing his investigation to a speedy termination, Sholmes proceeded to make an examination of the house in which he now found himself. He passed through Clotilde's boudoir into a corridor, at the end of which there was a stairway leading to the lower floor. He was about to descend this stairway when he heard voices below, which caused him to change his route. He followed the corridor, which was a circular one, and discovered another stairway, which he descended, and found himself amidst surroundings that bore a familiar appearance. He passed through a door that stood partly open and entered a large circular room. It was Monsieur Destange's library. "Ah, splendid!" he exclaimed. "Now I understand everything. The boudoir of Mademoiselle Clotilde, the blonde lady, communicates with a room in the adjoining house, and that house does not front on the Place Malesherbes, but upon an adjacent street, the Rue Montchagny, if I remember the name correctly. And I now understand how Clotilde Destange can meet her lover and at the same time create the impression that she never leaves the house. And I understand also how Arsène Lupin was enabled to make his mysterious entrance to the gallery last night. Ah, there must be another connection between the library and the adjoining room. One more house full of ways that are dark, and no doubt Lucien Destange was the architect, as usual. I should take advantage of this opportunity to examine the contents of the cupboard and perhaps learn the location of other houses with secret passages constructed by Monsieur Destange. Sholmes ascended to the gallery and concealed himself behind some draperies, where he remained until late in the evening. At last, a servant came and turned off the electric lights. An hour later, the Englishman, by the light of his lantern, made his way to the cupboard. As he had surmised, it contained the architect's old papers, plans, specifications, and books of account. It also contained a series of registers, arranged according to date, and Sholmes, having selected those of the most recent dates, searched in the indexes for the name Harmingeat. He found it in one of the registers with a reference to page 63. Turning to that page, he read, Harmingeat, 40 Rue Chalgrin. This was followed by a detailed account of the work done in and about the installation of a furnace in the house. And in the margin of the book, someone had written these words, See account MB. Ah, I thought so, said Sholmes. The account MB is the one I want. I shall learn from it the actual residence of Monsieur Lupin. It was morning before he found that important account. It comprised 16 pages, one of which was a copy of the page on which was described the work done for Monsieur Harmengat of the Rue Chalgrin. Another page described the work performed for Monsieur Vatinel as owner of the house at number 25 Rue Clapiron. Another page was reserved for the Baron d'Autrec, 134 Avenue Henri Martin. Another was devoted to the Château de Crozon, and the 11 other pages to various owners of houses in Paris. Sholmes made a list of those 11 names and addresses, after which he returned the books to their proper places, opened a window, jumped out onto the deserted street, and closed the shutters behind him. When he reached his room at the hotel, he lighted his pipe, with all the solemnity with which he was wont to characterize that act, and amidst clouds of smoke, he studied the deductions that might be drawn from the account of M.B., or rather, from the account of Maxime Bermond, alias Arsène Lupin. At 8 o'clock, he sent the following message to Ganimard. I expect to pass through the Rue Pergolese this forenoon, and will inform you of a person whose arrest is of the highest importance. In any event, be at home tonight and tomorrow until noon, and have at least 30 men at your service. Then he engaged an automobile at the stand on the boulevard, choosing one whose chauffeur looked good-natured but dull-witted, and instructed him to drive to the Place Malesherbes, where he stopped him about 100 feet from Monsieur Destange's house. My boy, close your carriage, he said to the chauffeur. Turn up the collar of your coat, for the wind is cold, and wait patiently. At the end of an hour and a half, crank up your machine. When I return, we will go to the Rue Pergolese. As he was ascending the steps leading to the door, a doubt entered his mind. Was it not a mistake on his part to be spending his time on the affairs of the blonde lady, while Arsène Lupin was preparing to move? Would he not be better engaged in trying to find the abode of his adversary amongst the 11 houses on his list? Ah, he exclaimed, when the blonde lady becomes my prisoner, I shall be master of the situation. And he rang the bell. Monsieur Destange was already in the library. They had been working only a few minutes when Clotilde entered, bade her father good morning, entered the adjoining parlor, and sat down to write. From his place, Sholmes could see her leaning over the table, and from time to time absorbed in deep meditation. After a short time, he picked up a book and said to Monsieur Destange, Here is a book that Mademoiselle Destange asked me to bring to her when I found it. He went into the little parlor, stood before Clotilde in such a manner that her father could not see her, and said, I am Monsieur Stickman, your father's new secretary. Ah, said Clotilde without moving, my father has changed his secretary. I didn't know it. Yes, mademoiselle, and I desire to speak with you. Kindly take a seat, monsieur. I have finished. She added a few words to her letter, signed it, enclosed it in the envelope, sealed it, pushed her writing material away, rang the telephone, got in communication with her dressmaker, asked the latter to hasten the completion of a traveling dress as she required it at once, and then turning to Sholmes, she said, I am at your service, monsieur. But do you wish to speak before my father? Would not that be better? No, mademoiselle, and I beg of you, do not raise your voice. It is better that Monsieur Destange should not hear us. For whose sake is it better? Yours, mademoiselle. I cannot agree to hold any conversation with you that my father may not hear. But you must agree to this. It is imperative. Both of them arose, eye to eye. She said, Speak, monsieur. Still standing, he commenced, You will be so good as to pardon me if I am mistaken on certain points of secondary importance. I will guarantee, however, the general accuracy of my statements. Can we not dispense with these preliminaries, monsieur? Or are they necessary? Sholmes felt the young woman was on her guard, so he replied, "Very well, I will come to the point. 5 years ago, your father made the acquaintance of a certain young man called Maxime Bermond, who was introduced as a contractor or an architect. I am not sure which it was, but it was one or the other. Monsieur Destange took a liking to the young man, and as the state of his health compelled him to retire from active business, he entrusted to Monsieur Bermond the execution of certain orders he had received from some of his old customers, and which seemed to come within the scope of Monsieur Bermond's ability." Herlock Sholmes stopped. It seemed to him that the girl's pallor had increased. Yet there was not the slightest tremor in her voice when she said, "I know nothing about the circumstances to which you refer, monsieur, and I do not see in what way they can interest me." "In this way, mademoiselle, you know as well as I that Maxime Bermond is also known by the name of Arsène Lupin." She laughed and said, "Nonsense! Arsène Lupin? Maxime Bermond is Arsène Lupin? Oh no, it isn't possible." "I have the honor to inform you of that fact, and since you refuse to understand my meaning, I will add that Arsène Lupin has found in this house a friend, more than a friend, and accomplice, blindly and passionately devoted to him." Without emotion, or at least with so little emotion that Sholmes was astonished at her self-control, she declared, "I do not understand your object, monsieur, and I do not care to, but I command you to say no more and leave this house." "I have no intention of forcing my presence on you," replied Sholmes with equal sang-froid, "but I shall not leave this house alone." "And who will accompany you, monsieur?" "You will." "I?" "Yes, mademoiselle, we will leave this house together, and you will follow me without one word of protest." The strange feature of the foregoing interview was the absolute coolness of the two adversaries. It bore no resemblance to an implacable duel between two powerful wills, but judging solely from their attitude and the tone of their voices, an onlooker would have supposed their conversation to be nothing more serious than a courteous argument over some impersonal subject. Clotilde resumed her seat without deigning to reply to the last remark of Herlock Sholmes, except by a shrug of her shoulders. Sholmes looked at his watch and said, "It is 10:30. We will leave here in 5 minutes." "Perhaps. If not, I shall go to Monsieur Destange and tell him—" "What?" "The truth. I will tell him of the vicious life of Maxime Bermond, and I will tell him of the double life of his accomplice." "Of his accomplice?" "Yes. Of the woman known as the blonde lady. Of the woman who was blonde." "What proofs will you give him?" "I will take him to the Rue Chalgrin and show him the secret passage made by Arsène Lupin's workmen while doing the work of which he had the control between the houses numbered 40 and 42, the passage which you and he used 2 nights ago." "Well?" "I will then take Monsieur Destange to the house of Monsieur Detinan. We will descend the servants' stairway which was used by you and Arsène Lupin when you escaped from Ganimard, and we will search together the means of communication with the adjoining house, which fronts on the Boulevard des Batignolles, and not upon the Rue Clapeyron." "Well?" "I will take Monsieur Destange to the Château de Crozon, and it will be easy for him, who knows the nature of the work performed by Arsène Lupin in the restoration of the château, to discover the secret passages constructed there by his workmen. It will thus be established that those passages allowed the blonde lady to make a nocturnal visit to the Countess's room and take the blue diamond from the mantel, and 2 weeks later by similar means, to enter the room of Herr Bleichen and conceal the blue diamond in his tooth powder. A strange action, I confess. A woman's revenge, perhaps, but I don't know, and I don't care. Well? After that, said Herlock Sholmes, in a more serious tone, I will take Monsieur Destange to 134 Avenue Henri Martin, and we will learn how the Baron d'Autrec— No, no, keep quiet, stammered the girl, struck with a sudden terror. I forbid you. You dare to say that it was I. You accuse me? I accuse you of having killed the Baron d'Autrec. No, no, it is a lie. You killed the Baron d'Autrec, mademoiselle. You entered his service under the name of Antoinette Bréhat for the purpose of stealing the blue diamond, and you killed him. Keep quiet, monsieur, she implored him. Since you know so much, you must know that I did not murder the Baron. I did not say that you murdered him, mademoiselle. Baron d'Autrec was subject to fits of insanity that only Sister Auguste could control. She told me so herself. In her absence, he must have attacked you, and in the course of the struggle, you struck him in order to save your own life. Frightened at your awful situation, you rang the bell and fled without even taking the blue diamond from the finger of your victim. A few minutes later, you returned with one of Arsène Lupin's accomplices, who was a servant in the adjoining house. You placed the Baron on the bed. You put the room in order, but you were afraid to take the blue diamond. Now, I have told you what happened on that night. I repeat, you did not murder the Baron, and yet it was your hand that struck the blow. She had crossed them over her forehead, those long, delicate white hands, and kept them thus for a long time. At last, loosening her fingers, she said, in a voice rent by anguish, "And do you intend to tell all that to my father?" "Yes, and I will tell him that I have secured as witnesses Mademoiselle Gerbois, who will recognize the blonde lady, Sister Auguste, who will recognize Antoinette Bréhat, and the Countess de Crozon, who will recognize Madame de Réal. That is what I shall tell him." "You will not dare," she said, recovering her self-possession in the face of an immediate peril. He arose and made a step toward the library. Clotilde stopped him. "One moment, monsieur." She paused, reflected a moment, and then, perfect mistress of herself, said, "You are Herlock Sholmes?" "Yes." "What do you want of me?" "What do I want? I am fighting a duel with Arsène Lupin, and I must win. The contest is now drawing to a climax, and I have an idea that a hostage as precious as you will give me an important advantage over my adversary. Therefore, you will follow me, mademoiselle. I will entrust you to one of my friends. As soon as the duel is ended, you will be set at liberty." "Is that all?" "That is all. I do not belong to the police service of this country, and consequently, I do not consider that I am under any obligation to cause your arrest." She appeared to have come to a decision, yet she required a momentary respite. She closed her eyes, the better to concentrate her thoughts. Sholmes looked at her in surprise. She was now so tranquil and apparently indifferent to the dangers which threatened her. Sholmes thought, does she believe that she is in danger? Probably not, since Lupin protects her. She has confidence in him. She believes that Lupin is omnipotent and infallible. "Mademoiselle," he said, "I told you that we would leave here in 5 minutes. That time has almost expired. Will you permit me to go to my room, monsieur, to get some necessary articles?" "Certainly, mademoiselle, and I will wait for you in the Rue Montchanin. Jeannot, the concierge, is a friend of mine." "Ah, you know," she said, visibly alarmed. "I know many things." "Very well. I will ring for the maid." The maid brought her hat and jacket. Then Sholmes said, You must give Monsieur Destange some reason for our departure, and if possible, let your excuse serve for an absence of several days. That shall not be necessary. I shall be back very soon. They exchanged defiant glances and an ironic smile. What faith you have in him, said Sholmes. Absolute. He does everything well, doesn't he? He succeeds in everything he undertakes, and whatever he does receives your approval and cooperation. I love him, she said, with a touch of passion in her voice. And you think that he will save you? She shrugged her shoulders, and approaching her father, she said, I am going to deprive you of Monsieur Stickman. We are going to the National Library. You will return for luncheon. Perhaps. No, I think not. But don't be uneasy. Then she said to Sholmes in a firm voice, I am at your service, monsieur. Absolutely? Quite so. I warn you that if you attempt to escape, I shall call the police and have you arrested. Do not forget that the blonde lady is on parole. I give you my word of honor that I shall not attempt to escape. I believe you. Now let us go. They left the house together, as he had predicted. The automobile was standing where Sholmes had left it. As they approached it, Sholmes could hear the rumbling of the motor. He opened the door, asked Clotilde to enter, and took a seat beside her. The machine started at once, gained the exterior boulevards, the Avenue Hoche, and the Avenue de la Grande Armée. Sholmes was considering his plans. He thought, Ganimard is at home. I will leave the girl in his care. Shall I tell him who she is? No, he would take her to prison at once, and that would spoil everything. When I am alone, I can consult my list of addresses taken from the account MB and run them down. Tonight, or tomorrow morning at the latest, I shall go to Ganimard, as I agreed, and deliver into his hands Arsène Lupin and all his band. He rubbed his hand, gleefully, at the thought that his duel with Lupin was drawing to a close, and he could not see any serious obstacle in the way of his success. And yielding to an irrepressible desire to give vent to his feelings, an unusual desire on his part, he exclaimed, Excuse me, mademoiselle, if I am unable to conceal my satisfaction and delight. The battle has been a difficult one, and my success is, therefore, more enjoyable. A legitimate success, monsieur, of which you have a just right to be proud. Thank you, but where are we going? The chauffeur must have misunderstood my directions. At that moment, they were leaving Paris by the Gare de Neuilly. That was strange, as the Rue Pergolese is not outside the fortifications. Sholmes lowered the glass and said, Chauffeur, you have made a mistake. Rue Pergolese. The man made no reply. Sholmes repeated, in a louder voice, I told you to go to the Rue Pergolese. Still, the man did not reply. Ah, but you are deaf, my friend. Or is he doing it on purpose? We are very much out of our way. Rue Pergolese, turn back at once. Rue Pergolese. The chauffeur made no sign of having heard the order. The Englishman fretted with impatience. He looked at Clotilde. A mysterious smile played upon her lips. Why do you laugh? He said. It is an awkward mistake, but it won't help you. Of course not, she replied. Then an idea occurred to him. He rose and made a careful scrutiny of the chauffeur. His shoulders were not so broad, his bearing was not so stiff and mechanical. A cold perspiration covered his forehead, and his hands clenched with sudden fear, as his mind was seized with the conviction that the chauffeur was Arsène Lupin. Well, Monsieur Sholmes, what do you think of our little ride? Delightful, monsieur, really delightful, replied Sholmes. Never in his life had he experienced so much difficulty in uttering a few simple words without a tremor or without betraying his feelings in his voice. But quickly, by a sort of reaction, a flood of hatred and rage burst its bounds, overcame his self-control, and brusquely drawing his revolver, he pointed it at Mademoiselle Destange. "Lupin, stop, this minute, this second, or I fire at Mademoiselle." "I advise you to aim at the cheek if you wish to hit the temple," replied Lupin without turning his head. "Maxime, don't go so fast," said Clotilde. "The pavement is slippery, and I am very timid." She was smiling. Her eyes were fixed on the pavement, over which the carriage was travelling at enormous speed. "Let him stop! Let him stop!" said Sholmes to her, wild with rage. "I warn you that I am desperate." The barrel of the revolver brushed the waving locks of her hair. She replied calmly, "Maxime is so imprudent. He is going so fast. I am really afraid of some accident." Sholmes returned the weapon to his pocket and seized the handle of the door, as if to alight, despite the absurdity of such an act. Clotilde said to him, "Be careful, monsieur. There is an automobile behind us." He leaned over. There was an automobile close behind, a large machine of formidable aspect with its sharp prow and blood-red body, and holding 4 men clad in fur coats. "Ah, I am well guarded," thought Sholmes. "I may as well be patient." He folded his arms across his chest, with that proud air of submission, so frequently assumed by heroes when fate has turned against them. And while they crossed the river Seine and rushed through Suresnes, Rueil and Chatou, motionless and resigned, controlling his actions and his passions, he tried to explain, to his own satisfaction, by what miracle Arsène Lupin had substituted himself for the chauffeur. It was quite improbable that the honest-looking fellow he had selected on the boulevard that morning was an accomplice placed there in advance. And yet Arsène Lupin had received a warning in some way, and it must have been after he, Sholmes, had approached Clotilde in the house, because no one could have suspected his project prior to that time. Since then, Sholmes had not allowed Clotilde out of his sight. Then an idea struck him. The telephone communication desired by Clotilde and her conversation with the dressmaker. Now it was all quite clear to him. Even before he had spoken to her, simply upon his request to speak to her as the new secretary of Monsieur Destange, she had scented the danger, surmised the name and purpose of the visitor, and calmly, naturally, as if she were performing a commonplace action of her everyday life, she had called Arsène Lupin to her assistance by some preconcerted signal. How Arsène Lupin had come and caused himself to be substituted for the chauffeur were matters of trifling importance. That which affected Sholmes, even to the point of appeasing his fury, was the recollection of that incident whereby an ordinary woman, a sweetheart it is true, mastering her nerves, controlling her features, and subjugating the expression of her eyes, had completely deceived the astute detective Herlock Sholmes. How difficult to overcome an adversary who is aided by such confederates, and who, by the mere force of his authority, inspires in a woman so much courage and strength. They crossed the Seine and climbed the hill at Saint-Germain, but some 500 meters beyond that town, the automobile slackened its speed. The other automobile advanced, and the two stopped, side by side. There was no one else in the neighborhood. "Monsieur Sholmes," said Lupin, "kindly exchange to the other machine. Ours is really a very slow one." "Indeed," said Sholmes calmly, convinced that he had no choice. "Also, permit me to loan you a fur coat, as we will travel quite fast and the air is cool, and accept a couple of sandwiches, as we cannot tell when we will dine." The four men alighted from the other automobile. One of them approached, and, as he raised his goggles, Sholmes recognized in him the gentleman in the frock coat that he had seen at the Hungarian restaurant. Lupin said to him, "You will return this machine to the chauffeur from whom I hired it. He is waiting in the first wine shop to the right as you go up the Rue Legendre. You will give him the balance of the 1,000 francs I promised him. Ah, yes, kindly give your goggles to Monsieur Sholmes." He talked to Mademoiselle Destange for a moment, then took his place at the wheel and started, with Sholmes at his side and one of his men behind him. Lupin had not exaggerated when he said, "We will travel quite fast." From the beginning, he set a breakneck pace. The horizon rushed to meet them, as if attracted by some mysterious force, and disappeared instantly as though swallowed up in an abyss, into which many other things, such as trees, houses, fields, and forests, were hurled with the tumultuous fury and haste of a torrent as it approached the cataract. Sholmes and Lupin did not exchange a word. Above their heads, the leaves of the poplars made a great noise, like the waves of the sea, rhythmically arranged by the regular spacing of the trees. And the towns swept by like spectres, Manteo, Vernon, Gaillon, from one hill to the other, from Bon Secours to Canteleu, Rouen, its suburbs, its harbour, its miles of wharves. Rouen seemed like the straggling street of a country village. And this was Duclair, Caudebec, the country of Caux, which they skimmed over in their terrific flight, and Lillebonne and Quillebeuf. Then suddenly, they found themselves on the banks of the Seine, at the extremity of a little wharf, beside which lay a staunch sea-going yacht that emitted great volumes of black smoke from its funnel. The automobile stopped. In 2 hours, they had travelled over 40 leagues. A man, wearing a blue uniform and a gold-laced cap, came forward and saluted. Lupin said to him, "All ready, Captain? Did you receive my telegram?" "Yes, I got it." "Is the Swallow ready?" "Yes, monsieur." "Come, Monsieur Sholmes." The Englishman looked around, saw a group of people on the terrace in front of a café, hesitated a moment, then, realizing that before he could secure any assistance, he would be seized, carried aboard and placed in the bottom of the hold. He crossed the gangplank and followed Lupin into the captain's cabin. It was quite a large room, scrupulously clean, and presented a cheerful appearance with its varnished woodwork and polished brass. Lupin closed the door and addressed Sholmes abruptly and almost rudely as he said, "Well, what do you know?" "Everything." "Everything? Come, be precise." His voice contained no longer that polite, if ironical tone which he had affected when speaking to the Englishman. Now his voice had the imperious tone of a master accustomed to command and accustomed to be obeyed, even by a Herlock Sholmes. They measured each other by their looks, enemies now, open and implacable foes. Lupin spoke again, but in a milder tone. "I have grown weary of your pursuit, and do not intend to waste any more time in avoiding the traps you lay for me. I warn you that my treatment of you will depend on your reply. Now, what do you know?" "Everything, monsieur." Arsène Lupin controlled his temper and said, in a jerky manner, "I will tell you what you know. You know that under the name of Maxime Bermond, I have improved 15 houses that were originally constructed by Monsieur Destange. Yes. Of those 15 houses, you have seen 4. Yes. And you have a list of the other 11. Yes. You made that list at Monsieur Destange's house on that night, no doubt. Yes. And you have an idea that amongst those 11 houses, there is one that I have kept for the use of myself and my friends, and you have entrusted to Ganimard the task of finding my retreat. No, what does that signify? It signifies that I choose to act alone and do not want his help. Then I have nothing to fear, since you are in my hands. You have nothing to fear as long as I remain in your hands. You mean that you will not remain? Yes. Arsène Lupin approached the Englishman and, placing his hand on the latter's shoulder, said, "Listen, monsieur, I am not in a humor to argue with you, and unfortunately for you, you are not in a position to choose, so let us finish our business." "Very well. You are going to give me your word of honor that you will not try to escape from this boat until you arrive in English waters." "I give you my word of honor that I shall escape if I have an opportunity," replied the indomitable Sholmes. "But, sapristi, you know quite well that at a word from me, you would soon be rendered helpless. All these men will obey me blindly. At a sign from me, they would place you in irons. Irons can be broken, and throw you overboard 10 miles from shore. I can swim." "I hadn't thought of that," said Lupin, with a laugh. "Excuse me, master, and let us finish. You will agree that I must take the measures necessary to protect myself and my friends." "Certainly, but they will be useless." "And yet you do not wish me to take them." "It is your duty." "Very well, then." Lupin opened the door and called the captain and 2 sailors. The latter seized the Englishman, bound him hand and foot, and tied him to the captain's bunk. "That will do," said Lupin. "It was only on account of your obstinacy and the unusual gravity of the situation that I ventured to offer you this indignity." The sailors retired. Lupin said to the captain, "Let one of the crew remain here to look after Monsieur Sholmes, and you can give him as much of your own company as possible. Treat him with all due respect and consideration. He is not a prisoner, but a guest. What time have you, Captain?" 5 minutes after 2. Lupin consulted his watch, then looked at the clock that was attached to the wall of the cabin. 5 minutes past 2 is right. How long will it take you to reach Southampton? 9 hours, easy going. Make it 11. You must not land there until after the departure of the midnight boat, which reaches Havre at 8 o'clock in the morning. Do you understand, Captain? Let me repeat, as it would be very dangerous for all of us to permit Monsieur to return to France by that boat, you must not reach Southampton before 1 o'clock in the morning." "I understand. Au revoir, master. Next year, in this world, or in the next." "Until tomorrow," replied Sholmes. A few minutes later, Sholmes heard the automobile going away, and at the same time the steam puffed violently in the depths of the Swallow. The boat had started for England. About 3 o'clock, the vessel left the mouth of the river and plunged into the open sea. At that moment, Sholmes was lying on the captain's bunk, sound asleep. Next morning, it being the 10th and last day of the duel between Sholmes and Lupin, the Echo de France published this interesting bit of news. Yesterday, a judgment of ejectment was entered in the case of Arsène Lupin against Herlock Sholmes, the English detective. Although signed at noon, the judgment was executed the same day. At 1 o'clock this morning, Sholmes was landed at Southampton.